Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Terry Nelms. I'm both with Mbala and Georgia Tech, and today I'm going to be talking about web witness, and it's a way to give context and help mitigate malware downloads. So remote malware downloads are very commonplace today, and the web browser is still an extremely popular infection vector. People will typically get infected through their browser through one of two methods. First, drive-by download. And so a user's browsing the web, they go to a web page that's been compromised, the web page redirects them to an exploit kit, the exploit kit finds a vulnerability on the user's machine, it exploits the user, and the user ends up downloading malicious binary. Also, users get infected via social engineering. And so a case of social engineering is a user browsing a web, that they're actually shown a malicious ad. The malicious ad may tell them that their machine is infected with malware and they need to install this new piece of software to clean it up. And so the user is actually tricked into downloading and installing that malicious binary. So there's been a lot of work that's actually looked at drive-by downloads and how to actually prevent drive-by downloads and detect those. There's been a little bit of work on the social engineering side of how to actually detect some specific cases in social engineering. However, there hasn't been much work that looked at what happened before the download. And so how did the user actually come to download that malicious binary? And what was the actual cause of the download? Were they socially engineered? Was it a drive-by download? And in addition, really going through and actually labeling the nodes in that download path and annotating them, such as in the case of this drive-by download where we automatically label the landing, injection, and exploit. And so that's the focus of our work, is to automatically provide this context to malicious downloads. And we do that through automatically reconstructing the download path and automatically identifying the cause, and then going through and annotating the particular nodes of interest. And the reason we do this is to one, help threat analysts understand current attack trends and how users are actually getting malware installed on their systems on the web. And also, we leverage these annotated download paths to help us develop more effective defenses against malware downloads. And so how hard is it really to find the actual path the user took that eventually led them to a malicious download? And so if you look at my slide, it seemed pretty easy here, right? I have 4 requests that happened just prior to this malicious download, and I simply circled those and showed that as the path. But in the real world, it is much more complex. And this is actually a web traffic graph of a single user's machine in the 5 minutes prior to a download. And so each dot on this particular slide represents an individual HTTP transaction, with the red dot representing the malicious download. And so what we want to do, what we want a system to do for us, is to go from this level of complexity to an annotated download path. And this is a real example. This in fact is the download path extracted from that graph on the previous page. And so here it shows the user starting at a search engine and then going through some web pages that eventually leads to a drive-by download from an exploit kit. And the nodes here have automatically been labeled by our system, as well as the actual cause, which is drive-by download. In addition to providing these annotated download paths, we also want to explore, well, how can we leverage these to improve defenses? And so today, for drive-by downloads, the majority of defenses are actually focused at the very end of this download chain. And so we typically look at things like the actual exploit itself, the exploit node, the actual executable that's being downloaded, and try to make a determination, is that executable malicious or not? And we end up often blocking these domains. And so one thing that we're going to look at in this talk is, well, what if we move back in this download path and actually try to implement a defense that actually starts closer to where the attack actually begins? And so when we first started our work in this area, we didn't really know how to reconstruct the download path. We didn't know how to do the annotation. We didn't know actually how to classify downloads into drive-by downloads, social engineering, or update. And so our first step was actually to conduct an in-the-wild malware study. And so we created a collection agent, and we deployed it on a large university network for a period of 6 months. And so this collection agent looked for an executable being downloaded on the wire, and it grabbed the previous 5 minutes of data, or HTTP transactions, from that user and dumped it to a file. We ended up with a couple 100,000 downloads over this period of time, but we were able to identify 533 of those as being malicious downloads, and they were spread across drive-by, social engineering, and update. And so for these 533 downloads, we did extensive manual analysis. And so we did a lot of reverse engineering. We had to do a lot of deobfuscation. We looked at plugins, and we manually reconstructed the path for all 533. We manually classified those as drive-by, update, or social engineering, and we also manually did the annotations. And so the result of this study is that we had some labeled data, and we also realized where some of the difficulties lied in trying to do this. And so one is the actual download path traceback is actually very difficult, and you cannot rely only on the refer and location headers to do it. You need a set of additional features to actually correctly do the traceback. And also labeling the roles of the nodes in the download path is extremely challenging. And this is due to the semantic gap between what you actually observe on the network and what is rendered in the browser. And so from our study, we built a system that we call Web Witness. And I'm going to walk you through this system now. And in the first step, the actual input to the Web Witness system is live network traffic. So this could be live network traffic, or it could actually be a PCAP as well. But what we're looking for is an executable download. And Web Witness buffers HTTP transactions from users. And so when we actually see an executable download, we can go back in the previous minutes. And in our case, we use 5 minutes. And we can actually take all that data and feed it into our download path traceback module. And so back to the graph I showed before, this is a web traffic graph. Web Witness constructs this. And so all Web Witness gets from that live network traffic are the actual dots, the actual individual HTTP transactions that were observed prior to that malicious download. It then goes through and actually constructs the source of relationships between those nodes. And so I mentioned before that you can't just use the refer and location headers. And so from our study data, if you only use the refer and location headers, you could trace back 0%. None of the drive-by downloads could actually be traced back using only the refer and location headers. About 50% of the social engineering downloads that we observed could be traced back using the refer and location headers. So what we had to do is look for a set of surrogate features that could be used in addition to the location and refer features. And so this slide shows our other surrogate features. I don't have time to go into detail about all of these, but I will mention one. And so it's URL and content. And so what we basically do in this feature is we look at the content of all the HTTP responses, and we extract URLs and partial URLs from that content. And then we look to future HTTP transactions to see if we have any partial matches between the URLs we observed in that response and future requests. And if we do, we actually draw an edge, between those requests. And so there's no single feature on here that dominates and helps us pick up the slack for the location and refer. It's actually the combination of all of these features that allow us to go from being able to trace back 0% of the drive-by downloads to tracing back 96%. And from being able to trace back about 50% of social engineering to 95%. And so once we create that web graph, though, it's still complex, and it's still not what we want. We would really like to have the actual download path, so the sequence of web pages taken by the user that resulted in that malicious download. And so what we do is each edge is basically weighted on its probability or the likelihood of it being a source of edge. And we use a greedy algorithm that walks back and takes the highest probable or the most likely edge for each node. And the result is our download path. And so once that's extracted, we feed that to our download cause classifier. And so here are some paths that have been fed to it. And we extract features from these paths, and our goal is to label these paths as either drive-by download, social engineering, or update. In the case of drive-by download, what we're looking for is the user was not aware that a binary was downloaded to their system, so it was something automatically that triggered their system to download this and install this malicious binary. On the social engineering side, the user was actually tricked into installing or downloading and installing the binary. And in the update case, the user already has malware running on their system, and the malware is either updating itself or it's downloading an additional piece of malware to install on the system. So the reason that we care about doing this classification is, on the one hand, to help us better understand attack trends, but more importantly, it allows us to know which defense module to send this path to. And so our classifier uses 6 features to classify a download path. And I don't have time to talk about all 6 features, but I will talk about one, which is the candidate exploit domain age. And so we have those paths, and we basically walk the path looking for what we call commonly exploitable content. And so those are things like Java, Flash, PDL, Silverlight, things that are commonly used by the attackers to exploit users' browsers, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the actual software that processes these file formats. And so if we locate a node that has this commonly exploitable content, we measure the age of the domain associated with that transaction. And so the way we measure the domain age is we have a large passive DNS database, and we go to this database and we look to see the first day for which that domain is resolved. And we compare that to the day that we actually observed this download. And that gives us the number of days between the first observation of the domain and when we actually saw this malicious download. And so in our study data, for the drive-by downloads, the median age for the domains that had this exploitable content was 0 days. And so the output of the download cause classifier are annotated download paths. And so these annotated download paths can be used by threat analysts to study current attack trends, but they're also fed into our malware download defense module. So now let's take a look at a couple of annotated download paths. And so this is an example of a social engineering annotated download path. And if we start at the very top, a user is actually visiting Omegle, which is an online chat application that allows 2 strangers to communicate. And so one of the users posts this in the chat room. He says, "Everyone at school says I'm ugly behind my back, and my whole family wants me to change how I look. Give me your honest opinions." And they post this URL, and it appears to be a URL to a JPEG, but because of the placement of the question mark, it's not. And so it actually loads a page that contains a frame that loads another page from this IP address, 172.88.75.20, that redirects the user to a free file sharing site called ge.tt, redirects them to another URL on the free file sharing site that eventually leads to a malicious download from the Amazon cloud. And so that's the type of information that Web Witness provides for a social engineering attack. So now let's take a look at a drive-by download annotated path. And so this one, the user actually starts out at yahoo.com performing a search. And so the search the user types in is Nashville music producer news. And the top result returned in the search results is a link to Nashville.com. So the user clicks on that. However, a few days before, Nashville.com was compromised, and there was actually a domain injected into Nashville.com, which is manualedition.com. And so this is the actual injection page, and it's associated with an iframe that redirects the user to an exploit kit. And so the exploit kit in this case is being hosted at valentinesdaymodel.biz. And so the first thing the exploit kit does it does a vulnerability probe. And so it checks to see what version of Adobe PDF is the user running, what version of IE is the user running, what version of Silverlight, what version of Java is the user running. And it eventually maps a vulnerable version of Java on the user's machine with an exploit that they have. And so it redirects the user to an exploit kit that delivers a malicious jar to them. And so the jar file is downloaded by the user. It exploits the user's Java vulnerability. And then the shell code ends up downloading a malicious binary. And so that's what the annotated paths look like. Again, they can be used by threat analysts, but we're also going to use them in our malware download defense module. And so as I mentioned before, most of the defenses that we have today focus on the very end of this download chain. And so what we want to do is actually look at adding a defense that looks at the very beginning of the attack. In fact, we want to target the actual injection node itself. And so the reason we find the injection node interesting is because it typically does not change. So once a website like Nashville.com is compromised, the actual injection node will typically live for the entire time of the website compromise. On the other hand, the actual domains like valentinesdaymall.biz, which is the exploit kit, they tend to change very frequently because they get blacklisted. And so this particular domain lasted less than 24 hours. And so if we want to block the injection domain, then we need to automatically find it. And so to do that, we actually built 3 classifiers, but because it's actually easier to find the exploit node first, and then once you know the actual location of the exploit node, identify the landing page. And then once the landing page is identified, we know that the actual injection domain must be a child of that landing page. And so we can use that information to then automatically classify the exploit, the landing, and then the injection page. And so here are the features for our 3 different classifiers for the exploit, landing, and injection. That they work basically in a cascade mode. And so the output of the exploits fed to landing, the output of the landing and the exploit classifier then fed to the injection page. And so the output of this system then is an attack countermeasure. And in our case, the attack countermeasure is to actually block that injection domain. So this slide show on the x-axis we actually have the days 0 through 30, where 0 is the day we actually observed the malicious download, and 30 is 30 days after the actual malicious download. The y-axis is the potential saved victims, and so we actually use our passive DNS database to measure these potential saved victims. So we have the passive DNS of a large ISP, and we look for users looking up these domains. We call them potential victims because just because a user looks up an exploit domain or looks up an injection domain does not mean that they were actually exploited, because they may not have a vulnerable system. And so in this case, for the actual dotted line is the exploit and download domains. And so it's all the exploit and download domains we collected. And you can see that they quickly die off. And so like after a couple of days, there's not many users at all looking up those exploit and download domains, simply because those domains have actually rotated out. However, if you look at the solid black line, that's the number of potential victims saved by actually blocking the injection domain. And so in this case, it doesn't die off nearly as fast as the exploit and download domains. And so by blocking that injection domain, we can actually save 6 times more victims than blocking just the exploit and download domains. So in conclusion, I talked about web witness and how you can use web witness to actually provide context to malicious downloads. And so the goal of web witness is actually to go from a complex set of HTTP transactions performed by the user prior to a malicious download to an annotated download path, and where we can actually show the actual the click path taken by the user from, in this case, a search engine through a compromised site through an injection node that eventually led to the download of a malicious binary. In addition to being able to use this information with a threat analyst to understand attack trends, we also showed that you could use Web Witness to actually implement new defenses. In our case, it was blocking the manualedition.com, which was the injection domain that allowed us to save 6 times more victims. The actual defense module for a witness, though, is not just constrained to this one defense. That we actually have other defenses that we've started to implement using this technique. And so with that, thank you for your time, and I'll now take questions about the system. Yeah, so in this case, we just looked at social engineering on the web itself, and so we didn't have any hooks in the email, get that data. But in some way, if you actually had the email data, you could probably extend it to look. I saw this URL in email, and then I saw the user visit the site. But our work focused only on the web. Yeah. So that's so our classifier classifies downloads in 3 ways. One is drive-by download, one is social engineering, and the last one is update. And so the update covers that case. And in addition to actually covering the malware just updating itself, also downloading like additional malware cases. Such as a case for like pay per install example. Yeah, so user agent string is actually one of our features that we use because the user agent string for a lot of updates of malware, it can be different than if you actually see the user's browser itself, and so we actually had a feature that was derived, from that information. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so to change out the injection domain, the attacker would either have to recompromise the site, right, to inject a new domain, or they would have to install software in some way that would periodically update the domain. And in both cases, right, we believe it actually increases the likelihood that the page owner, the owner of the compromised site, would be more likely to actually detect that their page was compromised and clean it up. And so that was one of the reasons we believe they didn't change that as much.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the talk. So assuming an adaptation for the drive-by downloads, where an attacker who has the ability to sort of download arbitrary pieces of data on the user's machine. So assuming an adaptation where the malware binary is split in 5 ways, right? And then the drive-by download downloads, 5, 1, 3, 2, 4 or something. How would you sort of re-engineer WebView to account for that?
Yeah, so in our case, we focus more on after you've actually observed the download itself, than actually performing the actual trace back. And so we would rely on another system to actually tell Web Witness, hey, this transaction is of interest because we actually saw a malicious download occur here, and then from that we would actually then reconstruct.
Okay, so you assume an oracle that will tell you this is bad.
Well, yeah, this is bad, or this is of interest, and we want you to do the trace back.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Rich Johnson, NCAR. In our manual mostly process, we've found that they do sometimes change the domain name that they are using in their drive-bys or their social engineering, but it often refers to the same IP address. And when we start black hole routing the IP address, we end up finding out that the site's hosted on GoDaddy's cloud. This gives us a certain rate of false positives, which causes complaints. I'm wondering if you've measured any false positives in your classifier and your detection of landers that was landing domains that were actually in use for other things.
Yeah, so on the injection domain side, we actually did measure false positives there, and we had a very low false positive rate. I can't remember the number, but I know we had like 7 domains total that we had that were false positives on the injection side. 5 of those false positives, though, we actually identified the exploit kit domain as the injection domain. And so it really didn't hurt us to automatically block those domains. But we did identify 2 domains that did have an Alexa ranking. And so that could cause false positives. And so we have other ideas as far as like using the popularity of the domain or actually having threat analysts review the domains, before they're actually blocked. But it was a sub 1% false positive rate in our case. Are there any other questions?